Sick bull with only days to live was ignored at the auction. Only one man made a bid and changed his destiny forever. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our last lot of the day. The auctioneer's voice sounded tired over the sound system. Adult. Bull unregistered, apparently of undefined breed. As you can see, the animal is weakened, underweight, and has several wounds on its body. A murmur of disinterest swept through the venue. Some buyers were already putting away their clipboards. Others chatted distractedly, many leaving. The auctioneer continued without enthusiasm. Minimum bid of $1,000. Anyone interested? The silence that followed was answer enough. James, who was about to leave, felt something strange when he looked toward the back of the pen. There was the bull, thin and downcast, with marks of poorly healed wounds all over its body. Its eyes, however, captured James's attention. There was something in that gaze, a dignity, perhaps, a will to live that refused to be extinguished. We'll close then, since there are no interested parties. $1,000. James's voice cut through the air before he himself realized what he was doing. The auctioneer looked surprised, searching the crowd. The few people present turned to James, some with expressions of bewilderment, others with mocking smiles. "Are you sure, sir?" asked the auctioneer as if he were doing a favor by questioning. "The animal is in questionable condition." "I'm sure," replied James, feeling his heart race without exactly understanding why. Something about that bull called to him, as if an invisible connection had formed the moment their eyes met. In a matter of minutes, the papers were signed. Michael approached, scratching his head under his straw hat. "Are you crazy, buddy? This animal has 1 foot in the grave. You're wasting your money." James didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the document in his hands that indicated the bull had been collected from an abandoned farm, without further details about its origin or health condition. "I'll take him today," said James, ignoring his friend's comment. "And how will you transport him? You don't have a prepared truck." "He'll go in my own truck. We'll drive slowly, stopping when needed." When they started loading the animal, the precarious state it was in became even more evident. The bull could barely stand, requiring the assistance of 3 men to guide it to the truck. During the journey, it faltered several times, nearly falling, drawing pessimistic comments from the auction workers. "This one won't last the week, Mr. James." "You're throwing money away, boss. For $1,000 you could have bought a healthy heifer." James remained silent. The truth was that he didn't fully understand what he was doing himself. At 58, widowed for 5 years, and lonely since his only son had departed this world 2 years ago, James had lost his way in life. His ranch, Oak Haven, remained productive because he had competent employees, but his own existence seemed devoid of purpose. The journey back to the ranch, located in the Kentucky countryside, was slow and careful. With every bump in the dirt road, James checked through the rearview mirror to see how the bull was doing. They arrived at dusk when the sky was already tinged with orange hues. Thomas, the foreman of the ranch for more than 20 years, opened his eyes wide when he saw what his boss had brought in the truck. "Good heavens, Mr. James, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" "A bull," he replied simply, as he maneuvered the vehicle to a small corral near the main stable. "That's a bull. Looks more like a skeleton with hide over it." Thomas approached cautiously. "The animal's on its last breath." "Go get some clean water and some fresh hay," ordered James, "and call Bill to help me unload." Unloading the animal was a delicate operation. The bull could barely stand on its own legs, and when it finally reached the small corral hastily prepared, it collapsed onto the fresh straw that James had spread. "Are you going to call the vet?" asked Bill, a young man in his 20s who had worked on the ranch since he was a teenager. "Tomorrow morning," replied James. "Tonight, I'll keep an eye on him myself." It was already night when James finally entered the main house of the ranch. Martha, the housekeeper who had taken care of the house for almost 3 decades, was waiting for him with dinner ready and a worried expression. "Thomas told me about the bull. Are you really going to spend your time and money on a dying animal?" James sat at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. "I can't explain it, Martha. I looked into that animal's eyes and saw something that reminded me He didn't complete the sentence, but he didn't need to. Martha knew he was talking about David, his son who had passed away at 27 after a long battle with a rare degenerative disease. The doctors had given up on him long before the end, but James never gave up, seeking experimental treatments, consulting international specialists, trying the impossible. "You still blame yourself," Martha said quietly, serving a plate of beef stew. "But you did everything you could for the boy." It wasn't enough. James picked up his cutlery but didn't start eating. "Maybe this bull is a second chance. I don't. No, I just know I need to try." That first night was anguishing. After dinner, James returned to the corral with a flashlight, old blankets, and a bucket of warm water. The bull remained lying down, its breathing heavy and laborious. The wounds, seen up close, were even worse than they had appeared at the auction. There were deep marks on its back and legs, some still raw. Carefully, James began to clean the wounds with warm water and a mild soap they kept for treating injured animals. The bull barely reacted to the touch, only letting out a weak moo occasionally. "Everything's going to be all right," murmured James, more to himself than to the animal. "You're going to get better, you'll see." He spent almost the entire night there, sitting on an improvised stool, watching the animal's breathing, checking if it could swallow some water with honey that James offered in the palm of his hand. At some point, he fell asleep right there, leaning against the corral wall. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When the sun rose, it was Thomas who found him in that uncomfortable position, with his neck hanging to the side and his hand extended toward the bull. "Mr. James, the vet is here." James woke up, feeling all his joints protest from the poorly slept night. He got up with difficulty, observing that the bull remained in the same position, although its eyes were open, watching him with an intensity that surprised him. Dr. Wilson, a veterinarian who had served the region for more than 2 decades, examined the animal with a grave expression. He measured the temperature, checked the heartbeat, examined the wounds one by one, collected blood for tests. "So, doctor," asked James after the detailed examination. The veterinarian sighed, taking off his gloves. "Honestly, Mr. James, this animal is severely debilitated. Severe malnutrition, possible anemia, infections in the wounds. It looks like it suffered mistreatment for a long period. But is there a chance for recovery?" Dr. Wilson hesitated. "It's hard to say. The situation is serious. If it were an ordinary animal, I would recommend, well, you know, putting him down," completed James with firmness in his voice. "But that's not what's going to happen. I understand your feelings, but you need to be realistic. You'll spend a lot of money and time, and even then the chances are slim. What are the next steps? What can we do for him?" Seeing the farmer's determination, the veterinarian yielded. "Let's start with antibiotics to fight the infections, fluids for hydration, vitamin supplements. He needs special nutrition. Start with grass and feed mash, since he seems to have difficulty chewing." In the weeks that followed, the routine at Oakhaven Ranch adjusted to the presence of the new inhabitant. Every day, even before sunrise, James was already at the corral, preparing the special feed recommended by the veterinarian. At first, it was necessary to feed him manually, as the bull could barely lift its head. The employees observed with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Thomas, in particular, didn't understand his boss's sudden attachment to that animal, which, in his view, would never fully recover. "The boss is spending a fortune on this animal," he commented to Bill as they watched James apply a homemade ointment to the bull's wounds. "He could buy 3 top-quality heifers with what he's already spent on medicine." Bill, younger and more idealistic, had a different view. "I've never seen Mr. James so committed to something since his son. You know, if this is giving his life meaning, what's the harm?" On the 4th day after the bull's arrival, something happened that surprised everyone. James had just arrived at the corral with a bucket of nutritious mash when he saw it. The animal was trying to stand up. With evident effort, the bull was supporting itself on its hind legs, struggling to raise its body. "Easy, friend, easy," said James, hurrying toward the animal. "No need to rush." But the bull seemed determined. With a painful movement, it finally managed to stand on all four legs, although visibly trembling. It stood like that for only a few seconds before collapsing again, but it was enough to light a flame of hope in James's heart. "Did you see that?" he exclaimed to Martha, who was bringing a bottle of water for her boss. He stood up on his own. "Yes, I saw, Mr. James," replied the housekeeper, allowing herself a small smile. It had been a long time since she had seen that gleam in her boss's eyes. That same day, James decided that the bull needed a name. He couldn't continue calling him just Bull or the animal. "I'll call him Oak," he announced during dinner. "Oak?" repeated Thomas, who was reporting on the progress of the harvest. "Yes, like the tree. Strong, resilient, living for a long time even in difficult conditions." From that moment on, Oak was treated almost like a family member. James had a more suitable shelter built, protected from winds and rain, with access to a small outdoor area where the animal could get sunlight when it was stronger. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Oak's recovery was slow, marked by small progress and occasional setbacks. There were days of high fever when Dr. Wilson had to be called urgently. There were mornings when the bull refused to eat, leaving James anxious. But gradually the signs of improvement became more evident. His coat, previously dull and falling out in tufts, began to grow more evenly and gain shine. The wounds were healing, leaving marks that silently told a story of suffering. And more importantly, Oak was spending more and more time standing, moving slowly around the small enclosure. "It's a miracle," commented Dr. Wilson 3 months after the start of treatment. "Honestly, I didn't believe he would survive the first month." James smiled, watching Oak calmly chew a handful of fresh grass. He just needed a chance, someone who believed in him. Oak Haven Ranch was known in the region for its quality hay and dairy cattle breeding. Though not one of the largest properties, it was well managed and prosperous. James had inherited the land from his father and wisely expanded the business over the years. Before Oak's arrival, James rarely participated in the day-to-day activities of the ranch, delegating almost everything to Thomas and other trusted employees. Now, however, he was present from dawn, involved not only in caring for the bull but also in other activities. "The boss is different," commented Susan, Thomas's wife, and responsible for milking the cows. "He even smiled at me yesterday, something he hasn't done in years." This change didn't go unnoticed by anyone, especially by Bill, who began to accompany James on his daily visits to Oak. The young man had always been interested in learning about animal treatment, and this was a golden opportunity. "Do you think he'll ever be strong enough to be a breeding bull?" asked Bill one afternoon, while helping to change the straw in the shelter. James scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I don't know, maybe. But even if he's not good for that, he's already fulfilled an important purpose." "Which one?" James didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on Oak, who was watching the two with apparent curiosity. "He made me remember that there's always hope, even when everything seems lost." It was during one of those routine cleanings that James noticed something strange. While brushing Oak's back, he noticed a different mark, partially hidden under the hair that was now growing vigorously. It didn't look like a common wound scar. "Bill, come see this." The young man approached, frowning as he observed. "It looks like a brand made with iron, but it's not a common number or letter." The mark had a peculiar shape, something like a stylized trident with a small circle at the base. James had never seen anything like it before. "I'm going to photograph this," he said, taking his cell phone from his pocket. "I want to show it to Dr. Wilson on his next visit." 2 days later, when the veterinarian came for Oak's monthly checkup, James showed him the photograph. "Do you know what this might be?" Dr. Wilson examined the image carefully, adjusting his glasses to see better. His expression subtly changed. "This reminds me of something. I'm not sure, but it looks like the mark from Clearwater Breeding Farm." "Never heard of it." It was a famous breeding farm about 10-15 years ago, specialized in a rare lineage of Angus cattle. They had a very advanced genetic improvement program for the time. James's interest was immediately piqued. And what happened? It suddenly closed. There were rumors of financial problems, others talked about sabotage, disputes among partners. I never knew the complete story, but I can ask a colleague who worked there for a while." That conversation left James restless. There was more to Oak's story than he had initially imagined. He decided to do his own investigation. In the days that followed, while continuing to care for Oak, who now walked with ease around the small enclosure, James researched Clearwater Breeding Farm online. He found little information, just a few old articles mentioning awards won at exhibitions and auctions. It was Michael, the same friend who had taken him to the auction where he found Oak, who brought the first concrete clue. "I remember that breeding farm," he said, after James mentioned the subject during a meeting in town. "It belonged to Old Man Thompson, a genius in bovine genetics, but temperamental as the devil. They produced top-quality bulls." "Do you know why it closed?" Michael lowered his voice, even though it was just the two of them on James's porch. "They say it was sabotaged. Sick animals started appearing, reproduction problems, things like that. Then a fire in the records. In less than a year, it was all over. Old Thompson had a stroke right after, never was the same." "And the animals? What happened to them?" "Most were sold for peanuts at liquidation auctions. I heard that some of the best specimens simply disappeared." The conversation left James even more intrigued. Could Oak be one of those missing animals? And if so, how had he ended up in that deplorable state? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The answer began to take shape when Dr. Wilson returned a week later, bringing news. I talked to my colleague, Dr. Bennett, who worked at Clearwater. He confirmed that this mark was used only on premium lineage animals, direct descendants of the famous Bull Emperor, a specimen that revolutionized the breed's genetics in the United States. "And is there a way to confirm if Oak is really from that lineage?" "Yes, with a DNA test, but we would need a sample from the original registry for comparison." "And where would we get that?" Dr. Wilson scratched his head. "That's the problem. Most of the records were lost in the fire I mentioned, but Bennett mentioned that old Thompson's son, Richard, might have kept some samples. He lives in Lexington now, teaches at the State University." James wasted no time. The next day he drove to Lexington, a journey of almost 2 hours, to try to talk to Richard Thompson. He found him in the Animal Science Department of the university, a middle-aged man with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. At first, Richard was reluctant to talk about the past. The closure of the breeding farm was clearly still a painful subject. "Why the interest in this old story?" he asked, after James briefly explained about Oak. "I believe I found one of the animals from your breeding farm. A bull that, despite the terrible conditions in which I found him, is recovering and shows signs of being a special animal." Something in Richard's gaze changed. "Do you have photos?" James showed the images of Oak on his cell phone, including the mark on his back. Richard examined each one with growing attention. "My God," he finally murmured. "It looks like man, but it can't be." "What?" "By the physical confirmation, even weakened, and by this specific mark, this could be one of the sons of Guardian, our second-best breeding bull, who disappeared shortly before the breeding farm closed." "Disappeared how?" Richard hesitated, as if weighing how much he could reveal. "Strange things were happening. Animals mysteriously getting sick, altered records. We suspected internal sabotage, perhaps orchestrated by competitors. Guardian and 5 other high genetic value animals simply disappeared one night. The police investigated but never found anything." "And did you keep samples for DNA testing?" "Yes, my father was always meticulous about that. I have a small genetic archive of our main breeding bulls kept in a private laboratory." James's enthusiasm was evident. "Would it be possible to compare with Oak's DNA? I can try, I don't promise quick results, but if it's really a descendant of Guardian..." Richard didn't complete the sentence, but his eyes shone with a mixture of hope and nostalgia. 2 weeks passed before the DNA test results were ready. During this period, Oak's condition continued to improve. He now grazed normally and had gained considerable weight. The scars were still visible, but the shiny coat and increasingly proud posture revealed an animal completely different from the skeletal and moribund one from the auction. James was in the corral observing Oak when his cell phone rang. It was Richard Thompson. "We have the results," he said, with a voice trembling with emotion. "It's unbelievable, James. Your bull isn't just a descendant of Guardian. He is Guardian." The revelation fell like a bombshell. It wasn't a son or descendant, but the premium breeding bull himself that had disappeared years ago. "How is this possible?" asked James, stunned. "How did an animal of this value end up in a discard auction?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out. This reopens the entire case of the breeding farm's closure. I'm going to contact the authorities and—" "Wait," interrupted James. "Before doing anything, we need to talk in person. This changes everything." The next day, Richard arrived at Oak Haven Ranch, accompanied by a young assistant who carried measurement and photography equipment. When he saw Oak in person, he couldn't hold back his tears. "It is him," he confirmed, slowly approaching the bull. "Despite the scars, the time passed. It's Guardian. I would recognize him anywhere." Oak, surprisingly, seemed to recognize something familiar in Richard. He approached the fence, allowing the man to touch his muzzle, in a gesture that moved those present. "He was worth a fortune," explained Richard, as he examined the animal with reverence. "At the time, we refused offers of more than $1 million for him. His genetics were considered among the best in the country." News of the discovery didn't take long to spread. First among the ranch employees, then in the local community. A journalist from the small regional newspaper heard the buzz and appeared at the ranch requesting an interview, which James reluctantly granted. The article, entitled "Rural Miracle Elite Bull Rescued from Death," was initially published only in the local newspaper, but was soon replicated on specialized agricultural websites, then in state newspapers until it reached the national media. Suddenly, the quiet Oak Haven Ranch found itself at the center of attention. Journalists, breeders, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the famous Guardian, now renamed Oak, and hear the story of his unlikely recovery. James, naturally reserved, felt uncomfortable with all that exposure, but there was something more worrying. Offers to buy the bull started coming in, increasingly larger offers. $200,000 in cash, offered a breeder from Iowa after visiting Oak. "It's a good deal considering you found him practically lifeless." "He's not for sale," was James's firm response. The offers continued to rise, $300,000, $500,000, until reaching $1 million, proposed by a consortium of breeders interested in recovering Guardian Oak's lost genetics. Parallel to this, Richard Thompson had reopened the investigation into the closure of Clearwater Breeding Farm. With the discovery of Guardian alive, new clues emerged about what had really happened years ago. "We believe it was sabotage orchestrated by a group that wanted to appropriate our genetic improvement technology," Richard explained to James during a visit. "When they couldn't, they decided to destroy everything. The most valuable animals were stolen, probably to be used in clandestine breeding. And how did Oak end up in that state? We're still investigating, but our theory is that he was kept hidden for years, used for illegal breeding. When he aged or got sick, they simply discarded him, without imagining that someone would recognize his origin." Oak's story had transformed into something much bigger than James could have imagined that afternoon at the auction. What had begun as an inexplicable impulse, an instant connection with a dying animal, was now a case of national repercussion, involving fraud, industrial, sabotage, and animal cruelty. But for James, the most important thing continued to be the bond he had developed with Oak. Every morning, even before sunrise, he was there, talking to the animal while serving him a now much more sophisticated diet, recommended by Animal Nutrition, specialists who constantly called offering free consultations in exchange only for association with the already famous case. One day, while James and Bill were maintaining the expanded enclosure where Oak now lived, something unexpected happened. One of the ranch's new calves, which had not yet been transferred to the appropriate pasture, escaped from the corral and ran toward Susan, who was carrying buckets of freshly milked milk. The woman, startled by the calf running in her direction, stumbled and fell. The calf, confused and frightened, continued running, now toward Bill, who had his back turned, hammering a board. "Look out!" shouted James, but it was too late for Bill to react. That's when something surprising happened. Oak, normally calm and even slow in his movements, moved with unexpected agility. He positioned himself between Bill and the runaway calf, emitting a deep and imposing moo that made the young animal stop instantly. For a few seconds, everyone was paralyzed, observing the scene. Oak imposing, protecting Bill from the frightened calf, which was now slowly backing away. He protected me," murmured Bill, impressed. James smiled, feeling a wave of pride. He knows who his friends are. The incident, witnessed by several employees, only increased the almost mythical aura that was beginning to form around Oak. Stories about his intelligence and sensitivity spread, some real, others certainly exaggerated. Oak's fame even attracted Emma, James's 16-year-old granddaughter, David's daughter, who had been living with her mother in Chicago since the divorce, years before her father's passing. The teenager, who visited her grandfather only during school vacations, arrived without warning one weekend, brought by her mother. "I came to meet the Miracle Bull," she announced, hugging her grandfather with an enthusiasm he hadn't seen in years. "Everyone at school is talking about him after that TV report." James smiled, genuinely happy to see his granddaughter. Emma had always been an intelligent and sensitive girl, with a passion for animals that reminded him of her father at the same age. "I'll introduce you to him tomorrow morning," he promised. "He prefers the tranquility of mornings." The next morning, James took Emma to Oak's enclosure. The bull, now with his health almost fully recovered, was grazing peacefully under the mild sun of the early hours. "He's beautiful," murmured Emma, her eyes shining. "Nothing like in the first photos I saw." "He's a fighter," replied James, with evident pride. "He went through a lot of suffering but never lost his dignity." Curious, Oak approached the fence, observing the visitor with his large, expressive eyes. Emma, showing no fear, slowly extended her hand. The bull sniffed her fingers and allowed her to touch his muzzle in a gesture of trust that surprised James. "He likes you," he commented, observing the interaction. "He's usually more cautious with strangers." Emma spent almost the entire morning there talking with her grandfather while watching Oak. It was in this serene environment that James finally managed to open his heart about the loss of his son, something he rarely mentioned. "Your father dreamed of taking over the ranch one day," he told her, as they both sat in the shade of a tree near the enclosure. "He had revolutionary ideas to modernize everything, make production more sustainable." "Mom says he was a dreamer," commented Emma with a sad smile. "He was. And that's not a flaw. The world needs dreamers." James paused, observing Oak resting under the shade of a tree inside the enclosure. "When he got sick, the doctors soon said there was no hope, but your father never accepted that. He fought until the last moment." "Like Oak," said Emma softly. "Yes. When I looked at that bull at the auction, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of your father. A strength, a determination to live, even when everything seemed lost." That afternoon, after lunch, James took Emma to a small orchard at the back of the property. There were several fruit trees and some ornamental ones, including a young oak, planted less than 2 years ago. "I planted it after your father passed," he explained. "He always loved this tree, said it was a symbol of strength and longevity." "It's a beautiful tree," commented Emma, caressing the still thin trunk. "It will grow strong here." James smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Let's plant another one, near Oak's enclosure. One to represent the past, another for the future." The next day, grandfather and granddaughter planted a new oak together in the paddock where the bull lived. The animal observed the entire operation with apparent interest, approaching when they finished. "I think he approved," laughed Emma, when Oak carefully sniffed the young sapling. That week with Emma brought new energy to the ranch and to James. The teenager, fascinated by Oak and his story, spent hours observing the animal, taking notes and photographs. She had a project in mind for her school's science fair. "I'm going to tell Oak's story to my classmates," she explained to her grandfather, "not just as a case of animal recovery, but as a symbol of resilience and the importance of believing, even when everyone tells you to give up." On the eve of her departure, Emma made an unusual request to her grandfather. "Can I spend the night in the barn near Oak? I want to observe how he behaves during the night to complete my notes." James hesitated, concerned about his granddaughter's safety. but Emma's determined look reminded him so much of David that he couldn't refuse. "All right, but I'll stay with you." That night in the barn, under the soft light of a lantern, grandfather and granddaughter talked like they had never done before. Emma spoke about her life in Chicago, her hopes for the future, her desire to study veterinary medicine. James shared stories of when David was a child, running through the pastures and learning about the ranch. "He was very much like you," he said with a nostalgic smile. "He had the same curious eyes, the same enthusiasm for life." On the other side of the divider, Oak rested peacefully, occasionally emitting a soft moo, as if participating in the conversation in his own way. In a particularly emotional moment, Emma confessed to her grandfather that she sometimes felt her father's presence, especially when she was in nature. "I know it sounds strange, but when I'm in places like this, I feel as if he were nearby, watching, taking care of me." James, with tears in his eyes, hugged his granddaughter. "It's not strange, I feel the same, and since Oak arrived, that feeling has grown stronger." Oak, as if sensing the emotion of the moment, got up and approached the divider, placing his large head as close as possible to where James and Emma were sitting. "See," smiled James, "he understands more than we imagine." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the months that followed, Oak's story continued to gain greater proportions. The case of sabotage at Clearwater Breeding Farm was officially reopened, with new evidence emerging from the discovery of the bull. Richard Thompson, now in frequent contact with James, kept him updated on developments. "We discovered that 3 other missing animals were found on farms in Canada," he told during a visit, "all in poor conditions, though not as severe as Oak. We're working to repatriate them." Meanwhile, Oakhaven Ranch was transforming. Inspired by Emma and the new energy that Oak had brought to his life, James began to implement some of the ideas his son had dreamed of. He installed solar energy systems, more sustainable methods of cattle management, and even opened a small practical animal science school for young people in the region. Bill was the first student and soon showed a natural talent. Under James's mentorship, and with occasional visits from specialists like Dr. Wilson and university professors, the young man developed impressive skills in animal care and management. "You should turn this into something official," suggested Bill one day. "A kind of recovery center for animals at risk like Oak was." The idea stuck. With Richard Thompson's help and the support of academic institutions, James founded the Oak Recovery and Animal Preservation Center, an annex to the ranch dedicated to rescuing, treating, and, when possible, reintegrating abandoned or mistreated animals. The demand was surprising. In a few months, the center was already housing various animals: horses rescued from abusive cart owners, dairy cows discarded by industrial farms, and even wild animals found injured on the region's roads. Bill naturally became James's right-hand man in administering the center. His dedication and natural talent didn't go unnoticed, and soon the young man received a scholarship to study veterinary medicine at the same university where Richard Thompson taught. The center's big star, however, continued to be Oak. The bull, now completely recovered, exhibited a majestic posture that impressed all visitors. His docile temperament, especially with children, was an object of admiration. Schools in the region organized field trips to meet the Miracle Bull, as Oak became known. James, initially reluctant with so much exposure, ended up accepting and even enjoying these opportunities to talk about the importance of respect for animals and environmental preservation. "Every living being has value and deserves a chance," was the message he repeated to young visitors, while Oak observed everything with his large, serene eyes. In one of these school visits, a girl of approximately 10 approached James timidly after the talk. "My puppy was very sick," she told him in a low voice. "The doctors told my mom it was better to prepare to say goodbye. But after we saw the story of your bull on television, we decided not to give up. And you know what? He got better. Now he's at home playing like before." Stories like this began to appear frequently. People from all over the country wrote or visited to tell how Oak's story had given them hope in difficult times, inspired them not to give up, whether on a sick animal, an apparently unfeasible project, or even overcoming personal problems. You've created more than an animal recovery center," commented Richard during a visit. "You've created a symbol of hope." James, now almost 60 but with renewed vitality, just smiled in response. He knew there was something special in that whole story, something that transcended the simple recovery of an animal. Emma, who now visited her grandfather much more frequently, especially during school vacations, was the one who best translated this feeling into words. "Oak wasn't just saved by you, Grandpa," she said one afternoon, as they both watched the bull rest under the shade of the young tree they had planted together, which was already beginning to grow vigorously. "You saved each other." It was true, before Oak's arrival, James was just a man broken by loss, existing more than living. Now he was surrounded by life again, building a legacy that honored his son's memory and created something new and important. James's transformation didn't go unnoticed by Martha, who knew him better than anyone. "You've come back to life," she commented one night while serving dinner. "It's as if you've awakened from a long sleep." James smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes we need a push from destiny, or from a stubborn bull that refuses to give up." The Oak Center grew rapidly in importance and recognition. Universities began sending students for internships. Veterinarians came from other states to learn animal recovery techniques, and even international delegations expressed interest in learning about the work done there. All this movement brought benefits not only to the ranch, but to the entire region. Educational rural tourism, as it was called, stimulated the local economy. Small inns were opened, restaurants extended their operating hours, local artisans found new markets for their products. "You've transformed not just your life, but the life of the entire community," observed the mayor of the small town during a ceremony in which James was honored with the title of honorary citizen, even though he had been born there. But the greatest transformation continued to be personal. James, who had isolated himself after the loss of his son, was now at the center of a network of relationships. He constantly received visits from specialists, students, journalists, and ordinary people touched by Oak's story. Among these visits, one in particular changed the course of his life again. Sarah, a veterinarian specializing in large bovines, came to spend a week at the center to observe the recovery methods used. At 55, with gray hair and an easy smile, Sarah had dedicated her professional life to animals after being widowed at a young age. Her technical knowledge impressed James, but it was her empathy with animals and her humanized view of veterinary medicine that really captured his attention. "Animals are not just biological organisms to be treated," she explained during a dinner at the ranch house. "They are sensitive beings with unique personalities and the capacity to form deep bonds." James, hearing her speak with such passion about a subject that was now central to his life as well, felt something awaken within him, something he believed was dormant forever. The week-long visit extended to 2 weeks, then 3. Sarah found, in the Oak Center, a project aligned with everything she believed in, and in James, a partner who shared her vision and values. "Perhaps I could stay longer," she suggested, on the eve of what would be her departure. "There's so much to be done. Here are so many possibilities." The veiled invitation didn't go unnoticed by James. That night, walking under the stars after dinner, the two talked openly about the possibility of Sarah joining the center's team permanently. "It would be an honor to have you with us," said James, feeling his heart race in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Your experience and vision would be invaluable." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the brightness of the stars. "It's not just the project that attracts me to stay, James." The silence that followed was filled with possibilities, both mature adults with stories of loss, but also of rebuilding. There was no rush, just the mutual recognition that something special was being born there, as unexpected as the bond that formed between a lonely farmer and a dying bull at a rural auction. Sarah's permanence at the ranch was received with approval by everyone, especially by Emma, who found in the veterinarian a mentor and friend. "She makes you smile, Grandpa," the teenager commented during her next visit. "In a different way." James couldn't deny it. Sarah's presence had brought a new dimension to his life. a type of happiness he believed he no longer deserved. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Clearwater breeding farm case finally reached significant conclusions. Based on discoveries initiated from the reappearance of Oak Guardian, authorities identified those responsible for the sabotage that led to the breeding farm's closure. "It was as we suspected," Richard explained to James, Sarah, and Emma during a dinner at the ranch. "A group of competitors hired people to sabotage our operation, poison some animals, steal the best specimens, and finally burn our records to cover everything up." "And what happened to Oak during all those years?" asked Emma, always curious about every detail of the bull's story. "From what we've discovered, he was kept on a clandestine farm in Canada, used as a breeding bull. When he got sick, he was brought back to the United States and sold to a cattle dealer, who kept him in deplorable conditions until discarding him at that auction." The information caused indignation in everyone at the table, especially Sarah, who had developed a special affection for Oak. "How can someone treat a living being that way?" she questioned, with her voice choked with emotion. "Use it and then discard it like a broken object?" "Greed does terrible things to people," replied James, covering Sarah's hand with his on the table, a gesture of intimacy that didn't go unnoticed by Emma, who smiled discreetly. With the conclusion of the investigation and the identification of those responsible, who would face charges for fraud, animal cruelty, and other crimes, a chapter in Oak's story was closing. But another equally important one was opening. Richard Thompson, as the legal heir to Clearwater Breeding Farm, had rights over Oak Guardian. Technically, he could claim ownership of the animal. This possibility had been a shadow over James. From the beginning, although Richard had never explicitly mentioned such an intention, after dinner, as everyone had coffee on the porch watching the starry sky, Richard finally approached the subject. "About Guardian," he began, using the bull's original name. "Legally, he belongs to the estate of Clearwater Breeding Farm, of which I am the sole heir since my father's passing." A tense silence fell over the group. James felt his heart tighten. Despite all logic indicating that Richard had this right, the idea of separating from Oak was simply unbearable. "I understand," he said with a controlled voice, although his gaze betrayed the deep sadness he felt. "You have every right to claim him." Richard smiled, an enigmatic smile. "Actually, I came here today not only to inform you about the conclusion of the investigation, but to resolve this issue once and for all." He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to James. "What is this?" asked James, hesitant. "Open it." Inside the envelope was an official document with seals and signatures. James read it quickly, his expression changing from apprehension to surprise, and finally to barely contained emotion. "This is a transfer of ownership," completed Richard. "I am officially transferring all rights over Guardian, now known as Oak, to you, James Miller. And not just that, I am also donating all genetic records, samples, and breeding rights of Guardian's lineage to the Oak Recovery and Animal Preservation Center." The surprise was total. Emma let out an exclamation of joy, Sarah squeezed James's hand, and James himself was speechless for a few moments. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. Richard looked at the starry night before answering. "Because you gave him what no one else would, a second chance when everything seemed lost. And because what you've built here, inspired by him, is much more important than any commercial value Guardian might have." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "Besides, my father always said that animals have a way of finding their true place. Guardian found his with you." Richard's generosity marked the beginning of a new phase for the Oak Center. With the rights to Guardian Oak's valuable genetics, it was possible to establish an ethical and sustainable genetic improvement program, which soon became a reference in the sector. But for James, the true wealth continued to be something else. On a Sunday morning, about a year after Oak's arrival at the ranch, he contemplated his transformed life as he observed the movement at the center, which didn't stop even on weekends. Sarah approached, interlacing her fingers with his. Emma, who was spending the vacation at the ranch, was coming right behind, carrying a folder with notes for her newest school project. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sarah, noticing James's contemplative look. He smiled, pointing to Oak, who was resting peacefully under the shade of the young oak tree, now already several feet tall. About how sometimes we find hope in the most unlikely places. About how a seemingly senseless decision can change everything. Emma, who had joined them, smiled. "Are you talking about when you decided to buy the sick bull at the auction?" "Yes." "At that moment, I thought I was just trying to save a condemned animal. I didn't realize that in fact I was saving myself." Sarah squeezed his hand, perfectly understanding what he meant. She too had found a new beginning there, a renewed purpose, and a love she didn't expect. "Grandpa always says that oak is a symbol of resistance," Emma commented to Sarah, as they walked toward the bull for the routine morning check. "But I think he's more than that. He's a symbol of how we should never judge value just by appearance, or give up just because everyone says there's no hope." James watched the two walking away, feeling a fullness he never imagined experiencing again after his losses. The pain of the absence of his son and his wife would never completely disappear, but now it coexisted with a new joy, a new sense of purpose. Oak, sensing the approach of Sarah and Emma, stood up with the same dignity that James had glimpsed for the first time at that auction. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, now shone with vitality. It was hard to imagine that this majestic animal had been on the brink of departure. "He's a miracle," commented Martha, who approached carrying a tray with breakfast. James smiled, taking a cup. "No, Martha, a miracle is something inexplicable. What happened with Oak was hard work, dedication, and the refusal to accept that something was lost just because it seemed to be." He paused, now watching Sarah carefully examine the bull, with Emma taking notes beside her. "But perhaps there is something miraculous in all of this," he conceded, "in the way an animal that everyone had discarded managed to unite so many people and create something so meaningful." The days at Oak Haven Ranch now had a different rhythm. The Oak Center was always busy with students, researchers, visitors, and of course animals in various stages of recovery. Oak, although no longer a young animal, maintained an imposing and serene presence. His area was now a large pasture, with access to a comfortable stable, close to the administrative center, so James could visit him several times a day. The ethical genetic improvement program developed from his genetic material was producing impressive results. Healthy, resistant, animals with good productivity, without the extremes of artificial selection that often caused health problems. On an autumn afternoon when the first leaves were beginning to fall and a pleasant breeze blew across the fields, James received a call from Emma. "Grandpa, I did it. I was accepted to veterinary school. I'm going to follow in Sarah's footsteps." The news filled James with pride. His granddaughter, now 18, had decided to dedicate her life to animals, inspired by Oak's story and the work developed at the center. "This deserves a celebration," he declared. "Let's have a special lunch next weekend." The celebratory lunch brought together all those who had become important in James's new phase of life. Sarah, of course, now his inseparable companion, Richard Thompson and his family, Bill, who was in his third year of veterinary school and frequently returned to help at the center, Thomas and Susan, who continued faithful in the ranch administration, Martha, who was more than a housekeeper, practically part of the family, and many others who had joined the Oak Center team. During lunch, served at the large table on the porch overlooking the verdant pastures, James raised his glass for a toast. "To Emma, who will soon be Dr. Emma," he began, with a proud smile. "Your determination and compassion are inspirations to us all." Everyone applauded, and Emma, blushing with emotion, thanked timidly. "But I want to propose another toast," continued James, "to someone who isn't at the table with us, but whose presence is felt in everything we've built here." Those present exchanged glances, knowing to whom he was referring. "To Oak," declared James, raising his glass even higher. "The bull that everyone discarded, but who proved that it's worth believing even when everything seems lost." "To Oak," everyone responded in unison, raising their glasses. After lunch, Emma asked to take her grandfather and Sarah to a special place. She led them to Oak's paddock, where the bull was resting peacefully under the shade of the tree that had already grown considerably. "I have something to show you," announced the young woman, taking an envelope from her bag. "My high school completion project received the State Science Award," She handed the envelope to James, who opened it with curiosity. Inside was an elegant certificate and a congratulatory letter. The project's title immediately caught his attention. Oak, The Science of Second Chances, a study on animal recovery and social impact. "Emma, this is wonderful," exclaimed Sarah, reading over James's shoulder. "That's not all," said the young woman, her eyes shining with excitement. "The research caught the attention of a major publisher. They want me to turn the project into a book, aimed at young adults telling the story of Oak and the center." The news caught James by surprise. A book about Oak? The idea that the story that had begun at that auction could now reach young people across the country, inspiring them to believe in the power of perseverance and compassion, was almost surreal. "What do you think, Grandpa?" asked Emma, anxiously awaiting James's reaction. He looked at Oak, who seemed to be watching them with his expressive eyes, as if understanding what was being discussed. "I think it's perfect," he finally replied. "Oak's story deserves to be told, not just for what he is, but for what he represents, for the way a single act of compassion can trigger a wave of transformations." Sarah smiled, interlacing her fingers with James's. "And for the way it's never too late to start again, right?" James nodded, looking fondly at the woman who had brought love back into his life. "Exactly. It's never too late to find a new purpose, a new joy." As they talked, Oak stood up and walked slowly to the fence, placing his large head near where they were. Emma caressed his muzzle affectionately, and the bull closed his eyes, apparently appreciating the touch. "You know, Grandpa," said Emma thoughtfully, "sometimes I think it was Dad who sent Oak to you." The suggestion surprised James. "What do you mean?" "I can't explain it exactly, but I remember Dad always said, there are things in the world we can't fully understand, invisible connections between living beings. Maybe he found a way to send you help when you needed it most." Although not a particularly spiritual man, James felt a deep emotion with his granddaughter's words. The idea that somehow his son might have guided his steps that day at the auction was strangely comforting. "Maybe," he said softly. "I know he would be proud of what we've built here." Emma smiled, her young face illuminated by a determination that very much resembled her father's. "And we're going to build even more. The Oak Center is just the beginning." That night, after everyone had retired, James returned alone to Oak's paddock. The full moon illuminated the field with a silvery light, giving an almost magical aspect to the landscape. Oak, sensing his presence, approached the fence. James extended his hand, caressing the muzzle of the animal that had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. "Who would have thought, old friend," he murmured. "From a dying bull that nobody wanted to a living legend that inspires people across the country." The bull responded with a soft snort, as if he perfectly understood what was being said. "But do you know what's most incredible?" continued James, speaking quietly, as if in confidence. "It's that in trying to save you, I ended up saving myself. You brought me back to life when I was just existing." A gentle wind blew, swaying the leaves of the young oak planted by him and Emma. The tree, like the center that bore the same name, was a symbol of renewal, of life that continues and strengthens even after great storms. "Thank you," said James, his voice choked with emotion. Perhaps it was just his imagination, but he could swear that at that moment he saw in Oak's eyes a gleam of understanding, as if the bull were returning the thanks in his own silent way. There, under the moonlight, a man and a bull, both, having faced adversities that seemed insurmountable, both having received a second chance when everything seemed lost, shared a bond that transcended words. A bond forged in compassion, perseverance, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light of hope to guide the way. The end of the story. And you? What did you think of James and Oak's journey? Share your opinion in the comments. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. Your sincere words inspire us to continue.